The cold came before the shame did. Emma felt it first in her bare feet, the frost-bitten stone of the great hall's threshold, sharp as a blade pressed flat against her skin. The doors behind her had already closed. She had not heard them lock, but she felt the sound in her chest all the same, a hollow thud that seemed to echo inside every rib. She did not look back. The courtyard of Ashvale Keep stretched before her in the gray light of early dawn, and every wolf who stood along its edges watched her with the same expression. Not cruelty, exactly. Something worse. Indifference. She was already gone to them. Already erased. Her linen dress was thin, the same one she'd been wearing when the summons came the night before everything unraveled. Her gray cloak had been left inside, forgotten on the stone bench near the fire. She hadn't been allowed to retrieve it. The leather cord at her waist held nothing useful. No coin, no food, no blade, just herself. Emma was 23 years old and had lived inside these walls for 4 of those years, first as a servant, then as a healer's apprentice, and finally, briefly, terribly, as something else entirely. Something she no longer had a name for, because the name had been taken from her along with everything else. She pressed her hands together in front of her chest, fingers lacing tight, and she walked. The gate at the far end of the courtyard stood half open. The wolves parted as she moved through them, not touching her, not speaking. One of the younger guards, a boy she had treated for a broken wrist 2 winters ago, turned his face away entirely. She noticed. She kept walking. The forest began where the cobblestones ended. She crossed that line between world and wilderness without ceremony, and the pines swallowed her whole. Inside the keep, in the chamber at the top of the eastern tower, Sebastian stood at the window. He was not watching her leave. He had told himself he would not. And yet his eyes had found her anyway. The pale shape of her moving through the gray courtyard. That golden braid catching what little light existed in the hour before sunrise. He tracked her until the gate swallowed her, and then he stood very still, jaw set, hands locked at his back. The scar along his jaw, a thin, pale line from jaw to cheekbone, tightened the way it always did when he was working to feel nothing. He was the alpha king of the Ashvale pack. He had made harder decisions than this. He turned from the window. His war chamber was cluttered with the debris of the night before. Maps spread across the oak table, half-weighted by a bronze compass and a stack of sealed letters bearing unfamiliar marks. His second, a broad-shouldered wolf named Darian, stood near the door with his arms crossed and an expression that said clearly he had an opinion he had not yet been invited to share. "Say it," Sebastian said, without looking at him. "You sent her out without a cloak." Darian's voice was flat. "She is not my concern. She healed half this pack through the black fever last winter. She is an Omega with no rank, no blood claim, and no place in Ashvale." Sebastian's voice did not rise. It never rose. That was what made it dangerous. The decision was made. It is done. Darian was quiet for a long moment. Then, "The Thornwood border is 3 days' walk from here. Through open highland, in late autumn." Sebastian said nothing. He picked up one of the sealed letters and broke it open with a thumbnail, scanning the contents with the flat efficiency of a man who had trained himself to stay ahead of his own thoughts. "Post a rider south," he said finally. "Tell the Greywood settlement to expect a visitor." Darian's brow shifted almost imperceptibly. "That is not nothing." "It is exactly nothing," Sebastian said. "It is an old obligation to a dead alliance. That is all." He set the letter down and did not look at the window again. Emma walked until the light changed. The forest floor was soft with old pine needles and the damp rot of fallen leaves, and she was grateful for that small mercy. It was easier on her bare feet than stone. She moved quickly at first, driven by something animal and urgent that had nothing to do with thought, and then slowly, as the cold deepened and the trees grew thicker, she began to focus on practical things. the way the moss grew heavier on the northern sides of the oldest pines, the sound of water somewhere to the west, the angle of the pale light through the canopy. She had grown up in a village at the edge of Pack territory. She knew forests. She had known hunger before, too, and cold, and the particular loneliness of being someone that powerful people found convenient to ignore. What she had not known, until 4 years ago, was what it felt like to belong somewhere. She had not realized how thoroughly she had started to believe in it. She stopped beside a wide pine and pressed her back to the bark, letting its rough solidity hold her upright for a moment. The cold was working its way up through her feet now, past her ankles, settling into the bones of her shins. She needed shelter before nightfall. She needed to think clearly and stop the part of her mind that kept reaching back toward the keep, toward the moment last night when everything had cracked open and then gone horribly, irrevocably wrong. She pressed a hand flat against her abdomen, held it there. A sensation that was not quite nausea and not quite warmth moved through her. She had been aware of it for several weeks now. A quiet, persistent presence somewhere beneath her ribs. A change in the rhythm of her own body that she, as a healer, recognized immediately and had said nothing about. She had been waiting for the right moment. There was no right moment now. "All right," she said quietly, to no one, to the forest, to herself. Her voice steadied her. "All right. One thing at a time." She pushed off the tree and kept walking. The rider Sebastian sent south reached Greywood in 2 days. The message was terse, as all of Sebastian's messages were. A single line requesting that the settlement provide temporary shelter to a wandering Omega woman, fair-haired, healer-trained. He had signed it with his mark and nothing else. What he had not expected was the reply that came back. The rider returned not with a written response, but with a person. An older woman named Wren, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, who had been the healer mother of Greywood for 30 years, and who arrived at the keep on horseback with the kind of posture that made even Sebastian's guard step back slightly. She was shown to the war chamber. She did not wait for invitation. She walked directly to Sebastian's table, set both hands flat on the edge of it, and looked at him with the expression of someone who had seen far too many things go badly wrong and had stopped pretending otherwise. "Your Omega never reached Greywood," she said. The room went very still. Sebastian's eyes moved to Darian, who straightened almost imperceptibly, his jaw tightening. "She has been gone 4 days," Wren continued. "It is late autumn. The highland between here and Greywood is no place for an unprotected woman in a linen dress." She paused. Let the weight of it settle. "I will ask you once, Alpha King, and I want the truth. Was she well when she left?" Sebastian held her gaze. Something moved behind his eyes that he shut down before it could become anything legible. "She was unharmed," he said. Wren studied him for a long, measured moment. Then she said something that would stay with him long after she had gone. Something that drove into the space between his certainty and his silence, like a cold blade finding a gap in armor. "She is a healer," Wren said quietly. "She would have known things about her own body that she had not yet told you. And if she was cast out before she could..." She stopped herself, shook her head slowly. "Find her, Alpha King. Before you discover what exactly it is you threw away." She left without waiting to be dismissed. Sebastian stood at his table for a long moment in the silence she left behind. Then he looked at Darian. "Gather 6 riders," he said. His voice was entirely controlled, entirely level, entirely the voice of a king. "We leave within the hour." They found her on the 3rd day, not in the highland meadows where Sebastian had expected, not sheltering beneath a rock ledge or huddled at the base of a pine. They found her in a ravine 1/2 a mile east of the old Thornwood trading path, in the ruins of a stone shepherd's hut so ancient that its roof had collapsed inward decades ago, leaving only 3 walls and the memory of shelter. She had built a fire from pine resin and dry bark. She had woven a rough mat from fallen branches and dead bracken to keep herself off the frozen ground. She had packed moss into the gaps in the crumbling stone to block the wind, and she was sitting upright beside the fire when they arrived, her golden braid loose and fraying, pine sap darkening her fingers, her bare feet wrapped in strips of linen she had torn from the hem of her underdress. She heard them before she saw them. Emma had always had good ears. Another thing that marked her as slightly unusual for an Omega, slightly inconvenient for the people who preferred their Omegas quiet and unremarkable. She was on her feet before the first horse crested the ridge above the ravine, her eyes scanning the tree line with a steadiness that had nothing soft in it. When she recognized Sebastian's shape among the riders, that broad silhouette, the black fur mantle across his shoulders, the long braids, something in her face went very still. She did not run. She had nowhere to run to, and she was too tired, and too cold, and too many days past the moment when running would have meant anything. She simply stood. Sebastian saw her the moment his horse cleared the ridge. He had been telling himself, for 3 days, that this was a search motivated by obligation, by the practical inconvenience of losing a skilled healer, by Wren's words, which were reasonable, and which he had turned over in his mind the way a man tongues a sore tooth, not because he wanted to, but because he could not entirely stop. He had not been prepared for the sight of what she had built. The small fire, the woven bracken mat, the moss-filled walls, the methodical, stubborn evidence of a woman who had been handed nothing and had made something from it anyway, in the cold, alone, without complaint. He dismounted without speaking. His riders held their positions on the ridge. Darian stayed on horseback, watching with that careful expression he wore when he was paying attention to something Sebastian was not saying. Sebastian walked down into the ravine alone. Emma watched him come. She did not step back. Her hands were clasped in front of her the way he had seen them 100 times, that particular gesture of hers, fingers laced, knuckles pale, the visible sign of a woman holding herself together through sheer, quiet will. He stopped a few feet from her. The fire crackled between them, small and brave against the cold. The smell of pine resin and wood smoke clung to everything. Above the ravine, the sky was low and white with the promise of snow. "You did not reach Greywood," he said. "No," Emma said. Her voice was steady, hoarse from the cold, but steady. "Why?" A pause. Something moved across her expression, not defiance, not hurt, but something more complicated than either. "I turned east. The Highland crossing looked wrong. The weather was changing and I did not have the right clothing for an exposed ridge." She held his gaze. "I made a practical decision." It was such a perfectly Emma answer. Practical. Clear. No self-pity in it. Sebastian felt something shift in his chest that he did not immediately have a name for. "Wren came to Ashvale," he said. "I know who Wren is." She said. He stopped, looked at her directly. "She implied there were things you had not yet told me." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight to it. Emma's hands tightened against each other, just slightly. The firelight moved across her face, catching the shadows beneath her eyes, the chapped pink of her cold, roughened cheeks. "Yes," she said quietly. "There were." Sebastian waited. She looked at him for a long moment with an expression he could not fully read. And he had spent 4 years learning to read her, which made that fact significant. It was the look of someone deciding not how much to say, but how to survive the saying of it. "I am with child," Emma said. "I have known for nearly 6 weeks." The words landed in the cold air between them and stayed there. Sebastian went very still. Not the controlled stillness of a king managing his expression. Something deeper and less practiced than that. Something that moved through him like a crack moving through old ice. Silent. Structural. Irreversible. 6 weeks, he said. "Yes." He said nothing for a long moment. The wind moved through the ravine, stirring the fire's small flame. A single flake of snow drifted down between them and dissolved in the heat. "You knew," he said. "When I—" He stopped. "Yes," Emma said. Her voice did not waver. but her hands were pressed so tightly together now that the knuckles had gone white. "I was going to tell you. That night. That was why I asked to speak with you privately. But then Lord Calder arrived with his accusations. And you—" She stopped herself, drew a careful breath. And then it was dawn. Darian, watching from the ridge, could not hear the words passing between them. But he had known Sebastian for 15 years, and he had never once seen the Alpha King stand the way he was standing now. Not rigid, not commanding, but something quieter and more exposed, like a man who had just looked down and found the ground considerably further away than he had believed. He said nothing. He waited. The snow began in earnest as Sebastian turned back toward his horse. He had not spoken again after Emma's words. He had stood in the ravine for what felt like a very long time, though it could not have been more than a minute, the fire between them, the snow beginning to fall in slow and indifferent curtains through the bare branches overhead. Then he had removed his black fur mantle, the heavy one with the iron clasp at the throat, the one that smelled of pine and leather, and the cold stone of Ashvale's towers. And he had held it out toward her without a word. Emma had looked at it, then at him. "Take it," he said. His voice had lost some of its usual command. It was not a softer voice. It was a more honest one. She took it, pulled it around her shoulders. The weight of it was enormous and warm, and it fell to her ankles because he was so much larger than she was, and she stood very straight inside it, as though she was determined not to disappear into it. He turned and walked back up the ravine wall toward the horses. "We return to Ashvale," he said to Darian, swinging up into the saddle. His voice was back, controlled, level, the voice of a man in charge of something large and complicated. Darian looked down into the ravine, where Emma was carefully extinguishing her small fire, pressing snow over the embers with methodical patience, not leaving it to chance. "And her?" Darian asked. "She comes with us," Sebastian said. He did not look back down into the ravine. "Prepare the healer's chambers, the good ones, not the east wing." Darian studied his alpha's profile for just a moment. "Understood," he said quietly. Emma was helped onto a horse by one of the younger riders, a quiet wolf named Osric, who had the decency to simply offer her a hand without making a ceremony of it. She settled into the saddle with her back straight, and Sebastian's mantle wrapped around her, her fraying braid catching the falling snow, her expression giving nothing away. But as the company turned north, back toward Ashvale Keep, and the forest closed around them in the white silence of early snowfall, Emma pressed one hand beneath the heavy fur of the mantle and held it flat against her abdomen. One thing at a time, she reminded herself. She was warm, she was moving, she was not alone. For now, that was enough. She did not let herself think about what came next, about the keep's stone corridors and the watching eyes, and Lord Calder's accusations, and whatever had made Sebastian believe them in the first place. She did not let herself think about what it meant that he had come for her, or what it meant that he had said nothing after she told him, or what it meant that the first thing he had done was give her the coat off his back. She would think about all of that. Just not yet. The snow fell steadily, covering the ravine and the cold ash of her little fire, and the careful bracken mat she had built from nothing, erasing all evidence that she had been there at all. She rode north, and said nothing, and kept her hand pressed warm and steady against the place where everything had changed. Ashvale Keep looked different in the snow. Emma had thought, riding back through the gates, that she would feel the cold of the courtyard stones the way she had felt them the morning she left, like a judgment pressed against the soles of her feet. But the horses' hooves rang against the cobblestones, and the gates swung open, and the pack wolves who lined the yard looked at her with expressions she could not immediately categorize, and the cold she felt was simply cold. Weather. Nothing more. She had been cast out once. She had survived it. The stones no longer had power over her that she did not choose to give them. Osric helped her dismount without fuss. She handed him back the reins and stood for a moment in the falling snow, Sebastian's heavy mantle still around her shoulders, and she looked at the keep's dark stone facade with its narrow windows and iron torch brackets, and the old wolf head carved above the main door, worn smooth by decades of wind. She had scrubbed that threshold once, in her first winter here, when she was 19, and new, and assigned to the lowest tasks of the lowest hall. She had been on her knees in the cold, with a brush and a bucket, and she had looked up at that carved wolf head and thought, with the particular stubbornness that had always been her most constant companion, "I will not always be on my knees in front of you." She had been right about that, at least. Wren was waiting inside the main corridor. Emma stopped when she saw her. The older woman stood with a candle in one hand and a wool blanket draped over her arm, her silver hair pinned back, her sharp eyes moving over Emma with the quick professional assessment of someone checking for damage. "You're thinner," Wren said by way of greeting. "4 days in a ravine," Emma said. "Come here." Wren wrapped the blanket around her without ceremony, pulling Sebastian's mantle away first and handing it to a passing servant without looking at it. She pressed the back of her hand to Emma's forehead, then to her cheek. "Cold, but not feverish. Good. Your feet?" "Wrapped, sore, not frostbitten. I'll judge that myself." Wren took her arm and steered her firmly down the corridor. "The Alpha King has given you the healer's chambers in the south wing, the ones with the proper hearth." Emma said nothing for a moment. Then, "He told you that himself?" "He sent word ahead. Ryder came an hour before you did." Wren's voice was neutral, but Emma had known her long enough to hear what lived underneath it. Wren had opinions. She simply parceled them out with great care. "He also sent word to the kitchens. There will be a hot meal waiting." Emma absorbed this, filed it away next to the fur mantle in the ravine in the silence after she had told him. "Wren," she said quietly, "what did you say to him when you went to the keep?" The older woman was quiet for a few steps. The corridor around them smelled of tallow candles and old stone, and faintly of the dried herbs hanging in bundles near the infirmary door, lavender, yarrow, pine bark, the familiar perfume of the healer's world that had been Emma's home for 4 years. "I said what needed saying," Wren answered finally. "No more than that." "Did you tell him—" "No." Wren's voice was firm. "That was yours to tell. I only told him to look for what he might have thrown away before he was certain he knew its value." She paused at a heavy oak door and pushed it open, revealing a room that Emma had never been inside before. Wide, stone-walled, with a deep fireplace already burning, a bed with an actual wool mattress, a worn wooden table holding a covered pot and a clay cup of something steaming. "I trust you told him yourself." "I did," Emma said. Wren studied her. "And?" Emma looked at the fire. The flames were generous and gold, eating through split oak with a steady, unhurried warmth, and the heat reached her across the room like something with hands. "He said nothing," she said. "He gave me his coat." Wren was quiet for a moment. Then she made a sound that was not quite a laugh, something drier and more complicated. "That man," she said, with the tone of someone who had lived long enough to find powerful people, equal parts exhausting and fascinating, "expresses himself entirely in actions, and not at all in words." She set the candle on the table and moved toward Emma's feet without further discussion, crouching to unwrap the linen strips with careful hands. "Eat something. Let me look at these. Then sleep. Everything else can wait until morning." Emma sat on the edge of the bed and let Wren work, and she ate from the covered pot, thick grain porridge with something warm and savory stirred through it. And she looked at the fire, and did not think about Sebastian's face in the ravine when she told him. She did not think about the way the crack had moved through his stillness. She did not think about what Wren's words meant, or what his silence meant, or what the coat meant. She ate, and she let herself be warm, and she slept. Sebastian did not sleep. He sat in his war chamber until the fire burned low and the candles guttered. The maps still spread across the table, Lord Calder's sealed letters stacked at the edge. The bronze compass caught what little light remained and threw a small, dull gleam across the ceiling. He had been over the sequence of events so many times now that the memory had worn grooves in him, smooth and deep. Calder's arrival, the accusations, carefully constructed, precisely timed, delivered in front of 3 pack elders whose opinions Sebastian had needed for the upcoming territorial negotiations. The claim that Emma had been feeding information to the Greywood settlement, passing word of Ashvale's borders and patrol routes, that her friendship with Wren was not innocent, but strategic. Sebastian had believed it. He had believed it because it was plausible, because Calder was a lord of standing, and his evidence had seemed solid. Names, dates, a forged letter with Emma's handwriting that Sebastian had been too angry to look at closely enough in that moment. Because he had told himself, for months, that the feeling Emma created in him was a weakness, and that believing the worst of her was simply the rational correction of an irrational attachment. He pressed 2 fingers against the scar along his jaw. He had been wrong. He had known it before Wren arrived, in the part of himself he had been refusing to consult. But Wren's visit had made it impossible to continue pretending otherwise, and Emma's words in the ravine had removed the last structure that the pretending had been built on. She was going to tell you, that night. That was why she asked to speak with you privately. He had not let her speak. He had listened to Calder instead. And then it had been dawn. He stood abruptly, and the movement sent one of the sealed letters sliding from the table to the floor. He looked at it, bent, and picked it up, turned it over in his hands. The seal was Calder's mark, a doubled crescent, pressed in black wax. Sebastian had received 6 letters from Calder in the past 2 months. At the time, he had read them as the correspondence of an ally. Now, with the particular clarity that came from having been badly wrong about something, he looked at the accumulated stack of them and felt a different kind of cold than the one the autumn had been providing. He set the letter down carefully and called through the door for Darian. His second appeared within moments. The man slept lightly and close to the door, a habit from years of watching Sebastian's back in places where watching was necessary. Calder's letters, Sebastian said without preamble. All of them. I want them looked at again. Everything. The seals, the courier routes, the dates against the patrol schedule. He paused. And find out who witnessed Emma's original handwriting before Calder presented that letter. Find the source. Darian looked at him steadily. You think the letter was forged? I think, Sebastian said, that I made a decision in anger and in front of witnesses, and that someone engineered exactly that. I want to know who benefits from Emma being gone from this keep. Darian was quiet for a moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but a kind of careful relief. The look of a man who had been waiting for his alpha to arrive at a conclusion he had reached several days earlier and had been too loyal to say outright. I'll begin tonight, Darian said. One more thing. Sebastian looked at the window. Dark now, snow still falling, the courtyard below empty and white. Post a guard outside the South Wing healer's chambers. Quietly, no announcement. Darian's eyes sharpened. You believe she may be in danger? I believe, Sebastian said slowly, that whoever wanted her gone from Ashvale did not expect me to bring her back, and I do not yet know what they will do about that. He turned back to the table, and the maps, and the cold remains of the fire. Go, he said quietly. Darian went. Sebastian stood alone in his war chamber, and for the first time in days, he let himself think about what Wren had said. She would have known things about her own body that she had not yet told you. He had known, in the ravine, the moment he saw Emma's hand press flat against her abdomen. He had known before she said the words. Some part of him had understood it as a recognition rather than a revelation. The way you understand, sometimes, that you already knew something the moment before someone confirms it aloud. 6 weeks. He pressed his hand flat against the oak of his table, feeling the grain of the old wood beneath his palm, cold and solid and real. He had a great deal to answer for. He intended to start immediately. The south wing was quieter than the rest of the keep. Emma had noticed it on her first morning. The way sound moved differently here, muffled by the thick stone walls and the heavy wool curtains that someone had hung across the windows sometime before her arrival. The hearth fire crackled steadily through the night and into the gray morning, and she woke to the smell of burning oak and the distant sound of the keep beginning its day. Boots on stone corridors, the low murmur of voices, the clank of iron from the training yard below. She lay still for a moment with her hand resting on her abdomen and her eyes on the ceiling's dark beams. She had slept deeply, which surprised her. She had expected her mind to refuse her rest, to spend the night turning everything over and over the way it had in the ravine, in the cold, when she had nothing to do but think and survive. But the warmth of the room and the exhaustion of 4 days in the forest had been more powerful than her thoughts, and she had fallen into sleep almost immediately and stayed there until the morning light changed the gray curtains to pale silver. She sat up slowly. Wren had left a clean dress draped over the chair. Linen, simply cut, with a heavier wool overdress in dark gray. Practical clothes. Emma pulled them on and braided her hair with automatic hands, and sat for a moment on the edge of the bed, looking at the fire. She needed to be clear about what she was doing here. She was not here because she had been forgiven. She had not been told she was forgiven. She had been brought back because she was carrying the Alpha King's heir, and whatever Sebastian's motivations were, duty, politics, a complication he needed to manage, she could not afford to mistake them for something warmer than they were. She had made that mistake once already. She had believed, gradually and entirely against her better judgment, that what existed between them was something real and chosen, rather than convenient and temporary. She would not make that mistake again. She would accept the shelter. She would accept the warmth and the food and the safety of these walls for the sake of the child growing inside her. She would be practical and clear-eyed, and she would not let Sebastian's silences mean things they had not been confirmed to mean. She was 23 years old. She had survived worse clarity than this. She stood up and went to find Wren. She found Darian instead. He was in the corridor outside her door, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed in the particular expression of a man who had been waiting and was mildly surprised that it had taken this long. He was broad through the shoulders and dark-haired, with a scar through one eyebrow and eyes that missed very little. Emma stopped, looked at him, then at the closed door behind her, then back at him. "Were you there all night?" she asked. "Shift rotation," Darian said, which was not quite an answer. Emma studied him. She had always been careful around Darian, not afraid of him, but aware that he was Sebastian's most trusted person, and that his opinions mattered in ways that were not always visible. He had never been unkind to her. He had also never been particularly warm. He existed in a careful middle ground that she had never been entirely sure how to read. "He sent you," she said. "He sent a guard," Darian said. "I chose to take the first shift myself." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Something moved across his face that was not quite discomfort, but was adjacent to it. The expression of a man deciding how honest to be. "Because I owe you an apology," he said finally. "And I prefer to deliver those in person." Emma looked at him steadily. "For what?" "For not speaking when I should have." His voice was level but not easy. "When Calder came with his accusations, I had doubts. I did not voice them loudly enough, or early enough, to change what happened." He held her gaze. "I should have." The corridor was cold and dim, the torch in the bracket above them throwing more shadow than light. Emma stood very still in her gray wool dress and looked at Sebastian's second, and she felt the words land in the honest place they were aimed at. "You are voicing them now," she said. "We are looking into Calder," Darian said. "The letters, the forged document, all of it." A pause. "I wanted you to know that." Emma nodded once. "Thank you," she said, simply without performance. He pushed off the wall and stepped aside to let her pass, and she walked down the corridor toward the infirmary, with the particular sensation of having received something unexpected and not yet knowing exactly where to put it. She spent the morning working. It was the most natural thing she knew how to do, and the infirmary needed it. 4 days without the healer's apprentice had left the herb stores in mild disarray, the drying racks improperly rotated, a batch of poultice that needed remaking. Emma worked through it methodically, grateful for the familiar smell of dried yarrow and pine bark, grateful for the task of her hands. 2 of the pack wolves came in during the morning. A young female with a wrenched shoulder from training, and an older man whose winter cough had returned. Emma treated them both without ceremony. The shoulder she wrapped and advised rest. The cough she treated with a steam preparation of pine and ginger root that she set to simmering on the infirmary hearth. Neither of them mentioned the fact that she had been cast out 5 days ago. Neither of them treated her differently than they ever had. She was not sure what to make of that. She filed it away with everything else. Sebastian came at midday. He did not announce himself. He simply appeared in the infirmary doorway, filling it the way he always did. That large, still presence, the black leather vest crossed with its worn straps, his braids pulled back, the scar along his jaw pale in the winter light coming through the window. He looked at the room first, taking in the neat herb racks and the simmering pot, and Emma at the work table with a pestle in her hand. And then he looked at her. "You're working," he said. "Yes," Emma said. She did not stop what she was doing. He came into the room, stood on the other side of the work table. The smell of cold air came in with him, pine and frost and the leather of his vest, and Emma focused on the dried bark she was grinding and did not let herself look at his face directly. "Emma," he said, "I am not going to make this easy for you," she said quietly. Her voice was steady. Her hands were steady. "I want to be clear about that before you say whatever you came to say. I am not going to pretend that what happened did not happen, or accept an explanation that makes it neat, or behave as though my feelings about it are irrelevant because you are the Alpha King and I am an Omega in your keep." The silence stretched. The pine and ginger preparation steamed softly on the hearth. "I know," Sebastian said. Emma stopped grinding, looked up at him. His face was not the controlled, flat-eyed face of the Alpha King in his war chamber. It was something more effortful than that. The face of a man who was holding himself to a standard of honesty that did not come naturally to him. The way someone holds a difficult position in a fight because they have decided it is the right one, regardless of the cost. "I believed Calder," he said. "I believed him because it was easier than believing what I actually knew. And what I actually knew was that I trusted you. And trusting you frightened me. And when he gave me a reason to stop, I took it." He paused. "That is the honest version. I am not offering it as an excuse." Emma looked at him for a long moment. The fire crackled. The steam rose. "Why did it frighten you?" she asked. Something shifted in his face. A small, almost imperceptible movement. The crack she had seen in the ravine, opening a little wider. "Because I am not a man who knows what to do with something he does not want to lose," he said quietly. The words sat in the air between them, simple and plainly meant, and entirely without the armor she was used to hearing in his voice. Emma set the pestle down on the wooden table. She looked at the worktop for a moment, at the pale dust of ground bark on the old wood grain, and she made herself breathe evenly. "I am not going to forget it happened," she said. "I need you to understand that." "I do," Sebastian said. "And I am not here because I have decided to trust you again. I am here because my child, our child, deserves walls and warmth and safety, and I am practical enough to accept those things." "I know," he said again. "But," Emma said, and she looked up at him directly now, and held his gaze with all the composed steadiness she had built from 4 days in a cold ravine, and 23 years of surviving things that should have broken her. "I am listening. If you intend to earn something, I am listening. That is all I can offer you right now." Sebastian held her gaze. He nodded once. A single deliberate movement, the nod of a man accepting terms that he knows are fair and has no right to negotiate. "That is enough," he said. He left without asking for more. Emma stood at her work table in the quiet infirmary, her hand resting lightly on the pestle, and she listened to the sound of his boots on the stone corridor until the keep's old walls swallowed them. Then she picked up the pestle and went back to work. What she did not know, what no one in the south wing knew, was that at the far end of the eastern corridor, behind a door left slightly ajar, a figure in a dark traveling cloak had paused to listen. Lord Calder's man. A shadow that had been in the keep for 2 days already, moving quietly in the margins of the household, waiting for word to send back to his lord. He had heard enough. He slipped through the eastern door and out into the cold courtyard, and within the hour he was riding south with a message tucked inside his boot. The Alpha King had brought her back, and she was carrying his heir. The snow deepened over the following week. Ashvale Keep settled into its winter rhythms, the training yard ringing with the sound of sparring, the kitchens exhaling warmth and the smell of roasting meat and baked grain into the cold corridors, the great hall filling each evening with the low sound of wolves at rest. Emma moved through all of it with the quiet efficiency that had always been her particular way of occupying space. Present, useful, undemanding, watching everything. She was not unhappy. She was careful not to confuse that with being safe. Sebastian came to the infirmary each day. Not at the same hour, not with any ceremony. He would appear in the doorway the way he always did, and he would stay for varying lengths of time, sometimes only long enough to ask a practical question about the herb stores or the condition of a pack member he had sent to her. Sometimes longer. He never pushed past what she had offered him that first day. He was learning, she thought. The particular patience of a man who understood that he was the one who had broken something, and that the rebuilding was not on his schedule. She was learning things about him too. She had known him for 4 years, but she had known him the way you know a landscape from a distance. The broad shapes, the obvious features, the weather patterns. What she was learning now was the closer geography, the way he read everything in a room before he entered it, a habit so deeply ingrained it had become invisible. The way he touched the scar along his jaw when he was working through something difficult, not as a self-conscious gesture, but as a private one, like pressing a thumb to a compass point to find direction. The way he listened, completely, without the restless half-attention of someone waiting for their turn to speak. She stored all of it away and told herself she was simply observing, being practical. Wren watched her doing this and said nothing, which was its own kind of comment. It was Darian who brought her the first piece of news about Calder. 10 days after her return, he came to the infirmary in the early evening, when the light had gone blue and cold through the narrow windows, and Emma was covering the herb racks for the night. He carried a folded document and set it on her work table without preamble. "The forged letter," he said. "We found the scribe Calder used. A man from the Thornwood border settlement who had access to samples of your handwriting from old supply records." He opened the document. "The letter forms are close but not exact. The ink compound is different from what you use. You prefer oak gall. He used a copper mixture. It reads wrong to anyone who knew your work." Emma looked at the document. She had spent 4 years writing careful inventory lists and treatment records in this infirmary, and she could see it immediately. The slight over-formality of the letters, the spacing wrong by a hair. Someone had worked hard at it. Not hard enough. "Sebastian saw this?" she asked. "He commissioned the analysis," Darian said. 3 days ago." She nodded, looked at the document a moment longer. "What does Calder want?" Darian's expression shifted in that small, precise way it had when he was choosing his words carefully. "That is what we are still working to understand. He has no direct territorial claim against Ashvale. His lands are south of the Greywood border, no immediate conflict with our pack." He paused. "But he arrived here 2 months ago. Before he arrived, Sebastian received 3 separate proposals from Southern lords seeking to arrange a formal bond match for the Alpha King." Emma looked up. Calder has a daughter, Darian said. 20 years old. The arrangement would have consolidated 3 southern territories under Ashvale's influence. The infirmary was very quiet. Outside, the snow was falling again, pressing its white silence against the window glass. He needed me gone, Emma said. It was not a question. An Omega healer with no rank and no territory would not normally threaten a political arrangement, Darian said carefully, unless the Alpha King's behavior suggested she was considerably more than that. Emma absorbed this. She thought about the months before Calder's arrival, the gradual, unannounced shift in Sebastian's attention, the way he had begun to find reasons to be in the infirmary, the quality of silence between them that had changed from professional to something that neither of them had named, but both of them had felt. Someone had noticed, before she had let herself notice. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Darian picked up the document. "Sebastian will tell you himself tonight. I wanted you to have time to think before he did." She looked at him. "Why?" He tucked the document under his arm and moved toward the door. "Because you think more clearly when you have had time to prepare," he said, "and because what he is going to ask you tonight deserves a clear answer." He paused at the threshold. "He is going to ask you to stay, not as a healer, not as the mother of his heir." A pause, measured and deliberate. "As his mate, formally, with full rank." Emma said nothing. Darian looked at her steadily. "I told you in the corridor that I owe you an apology. I am also telling you now, as someone who has known Sebastian for 15 years, that he does not ask for things. He does not ask. The fact that he intends to ask rather than simply arrange tells you something important about what you mean to him." He nodded once. "That is all." He left. Emma stood at the covered herb rack and looked at the empty doorway for a long moment. Then she sat down on the low stool by the hearth and looked at the fire. And for the first time since the morning she had walked out of Ashvale's gate into the cold, she let herself feel the full, unguarded weight of everything. Sebastian came after the evening meal, when the keep had settled into its quieter hours and the torches in the south wing corridor burned low and amber. He knocked. He had started doing that, knocking, waiting, entering only when she answered. Such a small thing. She noticed every instance of it. She was sitting in the chair by the fire, her hands in her lap, her gray wool dress warm in the firelight. She looked at him when he entered, and she did not rearrange her expression or brace herself. She had done what Darian suggested. She had thought. Sebastian came and stood near the fire, not crowding her, leaving the full width of the hearth between them. He looked at the flames for a moment before he looked at her, and in that brief pause she could see the thing that Darian had described. The man who did not ask, learning how to. "I have been thinking about what I said," he began, "about not knowing what to do with something I don't want to lose." "I remember," Emma said quietly. "I made it worse by acting on the fear instead of on what I knew." His eyes came to hers. The firelight moved across his face, catching the pale scar, the deep-set blue of his eyes, the careful, unarmored expression of a man who had decided to be fully legible. "I cannot undo that morning. I cannot give back the 4 days in the ravine, or the cold, or the fear you must have felt." He paused. "But I intend to spend a considerable amount of time making the difference clear." Emma held his gaze. "There are practical reasons," he continued, "for what I am about to ask. I will not pretend they don't exist. Calder's interference changes the political landscape, and a formal bond match would resolve several complications at once." He stopped, shook his head slightly, a gesture she recognized as self-correction. "But that is not why I am asking. I am asking because you are the most honest person I have ever been afraid of. Because you built a shelter from bracken and pine bark in a frozen ravine rather than simply give up. And that is the most accurate description I have of what I want beside me for the rest of my life." The words came out with the particular weight of something that had been held back for a long time. I am asking you to stay, as my mate, as the Alpha Queen of Ashvale." The fire crackled. The snow pressed against the windows. Emma looked at him for a long, unhurried moment. She thought about the morning she had walked across the frost-bitten courtyard stones. She thought about his fur mantle falling around her shoulders in the ravine. Wordless and warm. She thought about what Darian had said. He does not ask. And she felt the truth of it in the quality of Sebastian's stillness, the particular vulnerability of a powerful man standing in the honest exposure of a question he could not command an answer to. She thought about her child, their child, growing quietly and persistently inside her, like something that had decided to exist regardless of circumstances, with the same stubborn practicality that she recognized as her own best quality. "I told you I was listening," she said. "You did," Sebastian said. "I meant it." She held his gaze. "I am still not going to make it easy. I am not going to forget, and I am not going to pretend. And if you believe something terrible about me again before asking me first, I will walk out of this keep a second time, and I will not come back." "I know," he said. The same words as before, but weighted differently now. Not concession, commitment. Emma looked at the fire one more time, at the steady, patient burning of it. Then she looked back at him. "Then yes," she said, "I will stay." Something moved through Sebastian's face, through all that careful, practiced stillness, like light moving through a break in heavy cloud. It lasted only a moment, but Emma saw it. She filed it away, in the honest place, where she kept the things she had decided to believe. Neither of them knew, in that quiet south wing room with the snow against the windows and the fire between them, that Calder's rider had already arrived at his lord's estate with his message, and that Calder, reading it by candlelight at his long oak table, had set it down and reached for a different kind of correspondence entirely. The kind that was not sent to allies. The kind that was sent to people who solve problems that polite lords did not solve themselves. Calder's man arrived at Ashvale 3 days later, not riding through the front gate this time. He came through the eastern forest, through the gap in the old stone wall near the mill that had needed repairing since the previous spring, and that no one had yet gotten around to fixing. He came at the gray hour before dawn, when the keep was at its quietest, and the snow muffled every sound, and he carried a small clay vial in the breast pocket of his cloak, the kind of thing a careful man keeps close to his chest. He did not reach the south wing. Darian had posted 2 wolves at the mill gap for 6 days. Not because he had proof, because he had learned, in 15 years of watching Sebastian's back, that the moment a threat is neutralized on one front, it rearranges itself and comes from another direction. Calder's man was taken quietly, in the snow, before he had crossed the inner yard. The clay vial was examined by Emma the following morning. She held it up to the infirmary window, turning it in the pale winter light, and she identified the compound without needing to open it. A concentrated extract of silver root and black sedge, the kind of thing that, added to food or drink, would induce a miscarriage in the early months of a pregnancy and leave no trace that looked like anything other than misfortune. She set the vial down on the work table very carefully. Her hands were steady. She had always had steady hands. Sebastian was in the room. He had been standing near the door when she made the identification, and the silence that followed it was the kind that changes the temperature of a room. She looked at him, and saw something in his face she had not seen before. Not the controlled blankness, not the effortful honesty of the past 2 weeks, but something older and colder, and entirely without ambiguity. "Don't," Emma said quietly. He looked at her. "Whatever you are about to decide to do," she said, "don't do it in this room. Not in front of me." A long pause. The muscle along his jaw tightened. Then slowly, deliberately, he brought himself back from wherever he had gone. The way a man steps back from a ledge not because someone pushed him, but because he chose to. "Calder will answer for this," he said. His voice was level. "Formally, before the pack elders and the southern lords. Every letter, every forged document, every action from the moment he arrived in Ashvale. He held her gaze, publicly, so there is no question remaining about what happened and why. Emma looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded. That is the right way. I know, he said. And for the first time when he said those words, she heard something almost like the beginning of a smile underneath them. The formal hearing took place 2 weeks later in the Great Hall of Ashvale Keep, with the pack elders seated at the long table and representatives from 4 southern territories standing along the walls. Calder did not come himself. He sent a proxy, a thin man in good clothes who arrived with the expression of someone who had been handed an impossible task and knew it. The evidence Darian had assembled was thorough and entirely without gaps. The forged letter, the scribe's testimony, the courier routes, the clay vial and its contents, identified in writing by 3 separate healers including Wren, who delivered her testimony with the composed devastation of a woman who had been in the business of preserving life for 30 years and had no patience whatsoever for those who threatened it. The proxy had very little to say. Calder's lands were placed under pack sanction. His territorial agreements were dissolved. The proposed bond match arrangements from the Southern Lords, all 3 of them, were formally withdrawn, their lords having very quickly recalculated where their interests lay, once the full picture became clear. It was not a violent ending. It was, in many ways, a more complete one. Emma stood at the window of the south wing room that had become, gradually and without ceremony, simply her room. And she watched the last of Calder's proxy's party ride out through the snow-covered courtyard below. She rested her hand on her abdomen. Nearly 4 months now. The child was making itself known in small ways. A heaviness, a warmth, a gravitational pull toward stillness that she was learning to accommodate. She had delivered enough babies in her time as a healer to know what the coming months would look like. And she faced the knowledge with the same practical steadiness she brought to everything. She heard Sebastian's step in the corridor. She knew it now, the particular weight and rhythm of it. And then his knock, and then the door. He came to stand beside her at the window. They stood together looking out at the courtyard, at the gray winter sky above the keep's stone walls, at the snow lying clean and undisturbed across the cobblestones where Calder's horses had already left their tracks, filling in with fresh fall. "It's done," Sebastian said. "Yes," Emma said. He looked at her. She looked back at him, and she let her face be fully readable, something she had been practicing, because she had decided that if she was going to ask it of him, she needed to offer it in return. He saw it. She watched him see it, and watched the thing it did to his expression, the way it opened. "Wren has agreed to stay through the birth," Emma said. "Good," Sebastian said. "And I want the east garden cleared in spring, for growing. Properly, not just utility herbs. I'll have it done. And you are going to have to learn," she said, turning to face him more fully. "To say things out loud, the actual words, not just actions." Sebastian looked at her. Something in his eyes shifted. That deep, quiet warmth she had been watching grow over the past weeks like a fire catching in good dry wood, patient and inevitable. "I am aware," he said. A pause. "I am working on it." "I know," Emma said. And this time she was the one who almost smiled. He reached out and took her hand, simply without announcement, the way he did everything that mattered to him. His hand was warm and rough and very certain, and she let her fingers close around his and looked back out at the snow-covered courtyard and the pale winter sky. The keep breathed around them, full of the sounds of its ordinary life. Boots on stone, the clank of iron from the training yard, the distant smell of the kitchens beginning the day's work, the low voices of wolves going about the business of living. Emma had scrubbed the threshold of this keep on her knees in her first winter here, and told herself she would not always be on her knees in front of it. She had been right. She was still here, still standing, still herself. All the stubborn, practical, quietly unbreakable parts of her intact, and something new growing alongside them. warm and persistent, and entirely certain of its own existence. That was enough. That was, she thought, exactly enough. Wren stayed through the birth and through the spring that followed, and declared the East Garden the finest medicinal plot in the Northern Territories, before returning to Greywood with the particular satisfaction of a woman who had gone somewhere to fix something and had fixed it thoroughly. Darian remained at Sebastian's side as he always had, though he was known afterward to check personally on the South Wing corridor, with considerably more frequency than his duties required. Lord Calder spent 2 years attempting to rebuild his alliances in the South and found the doors consistently closed, and eventually retired to a smaller estate and a quieter life. The child, a boy, born in early spring with his father's dark hair and his mother's steady gray eyes, arrived in the manner of someone who had always intended to be there and was simply waiting for the right moment. Emma held him in the good light of the South Wing window, while the snow outside was finally, after a long winter, beginning to melt, and she thought, with the plain and honest certainty that had always been her truest compass, that some things that break open in the cold find their way, with patience and with time, to something warmer and more real than what existed before the breaking, and that was how it ended. Not with a return to what had been, but with something new, held carefully in steady hands, already growing.